My wife is the city's swimming champion. When both her unforgettable first love and I fell into the water, she didn't hesitate for a second before saving him. After pulling him to safety, he looked at me with a provocative smirk and said, "Sorry, Emily's too tired to save you. You'll have to figure out how to get out on your own." Struggling in the water, I looked up at Emily, but her expression was one of disdain. "You must have pushed Daniel. How else could he have fallen into the water?" she said coldly. I was drained of strength and began to sink, but Emily panicked. Chapter 1. "Help! Help!" Both Daniel and I screamed, desperately calling for help. But Emily didn't even glance at me. Instead, she dove into the water and swam straight toward Daniel, as if I wasn't even there. "Daniel, are you okay?" I watched her back, wanting to scream for help, but the rushing river water filled my mouth and nose. It surged into me, the coldness swallowing me whole. I sank deeper, powerless, as I watched Emily saving Daniel, bringing him to the shore. Daniel turned and gave me a challenging look. "Sorry, Emily's too tired to save you. You'll have to figure out how to get out on your own." I wanted to say something, but my despair only let me stare silently, unable to speak. Gradually, I sank further, until a swimmer finally noticed me and dragged me to the shore. I coughed and gasped for air, feeling like a fish stranded on land. Meanwhile, Emily was drying Daniel's head with a towel, not even sparing me a glance. Once she finished, she looked down at me with contempt. "You must have pushed Daniel. How else could he have ended up in the water? Don't you know how terrified he is of water? Why would you do something so disgusting?" Daniel quickly intervened. "It's okay, Emily. Don't get angry. I don't think James meant it. I was just too close to you. And he felt uncomfortable. It's always like this." With those few words, my fate was sealed. No matter what I did, Emily always took Daniel's side, believing every slanderous word, every provocation against me, just because he was her unforgettable first love from high school. "James, you're disgusting. You should have drowned just now. You're uncomfortable, so you try to kill someone? If I hadn't been here, the consequences would have been unthinkable," she said. I was exhausted, physically drained from my struggles in the water. I couldn't even argue, let alone speak. The onlookers around us were whispering and pointing, as if they were watching some kind of absurd joke. Normally, I would have defended myself the moment Daniel slandered me. If Emily didn't believe me, I'd bow my head, admit fault, and apologize to both of them, taking the blame. But in that moment, during my desperate struggle, something inside me shifted. I realized that apart from life and death, nothing else mattered. Having already stepped one foot into the abyss, why should I care whether she divorces me or fights with me? "You two are perfect for each other. One says it, and the other believes it," I muttered as I struggled to sit up. Emily's face instantly darkened. "James, what do you mean? Are you still doubting our relationship? I've already told you we're just friends. Can you stop making trouble?" she snapped. With that, Emily turned and walked away, taking Daniel back to the hotel, leaving me alone by the river. In 3 years of marriage, I'd heard that sentence many times, whenever I didn't meet her expectations, or when I couldn't tolerate Daniel's presence. She would leave me with those words, and each time, I would go after her, apologizing as if I were in the wrong. Looking at the situation now, I realized that it was me who hadn't been thinking clearly. A wife who can disregard my life is not someone worth cherishing. Chapter 2. I'd been soaked in the cold river for too long, and the next day I developed a high fever. I stayed in the hotel all day, but my fever was so severe, and since I was unfamiliar with this city, and only here with Emily and Daniel, there was no one to take care of me. After some thought, I struggled to call Emily. When the call connected, the blaring music from a club hit my ears, and I could immediately tell she and Daniel were out having fun. When she answered, her voice was laced with annoyance. "James, why are you calling? Don't you know we have our own things to do?" I held my temper in check and spoke softly. "Emily, I'm sick. Could you please get me some fever medicine and bring it to me?" Before I could finish, the call was abruptly cut off. Stunned, I couldn't believe that Emily had hung up on me. I tried calling again. This time, her tone was even more impatient. "James, can you stop bothering me? Do you think pretending to be sick will fool me? You just don't want me to have fun with Daniel. Let me tell you something, James. Stop making a scene. We came here for work and just wanted to relax for a bit. Don't make trouble. Her words were like a flood crashing through my fevered mind, and it took me a moment to process them. Emily thought I was pretending to be sick. I collapsed back onto the bed, my mind becoming even fuzzier. Just then, my phone rang again. I hoped it was Emily, but it was a voice I didn't expect. Hey James, I saw your social media. You're in the city too, right? Want to grab dinner? It took a moment to recognize the voice. It was Megan, my best friend from college. We had lost touch after graduation, but she had always been there for me back then. I replied, Megan, could you pick up some fever medicine for me? I'll send you the address. Less than 30 minutes later, Megan arrived at my room. I struggled to get out of bed and open the door. As she walked in, she asked, I thought Emily was with you. Why isn't she here taking care of you? I forced a bitter smile. She's out partying. We came to this city for a project Emily's working on. That's her job, and I didn't mind. But Daniel decided to come too, saying he wanted to sightsee. I couldn't let him go alone with my wife, so I tagged along. But Emily hasn't been kind to me this entire trip. We don't even share a room, and she keeps bossing me around. Megan was momentarily speechless. After handing me the medicine, she went to the supermarket to buy fever patches. Unfortunately, on her way back, she ran into Emily and Daniel. For convenience, I had given Megan my room key, but Emily, upon seeing her, immediately assumed she was a mistress. With a look of having caught someone in the act, she kicked the door open and started arguing with Megan. I've told you before, I'm James's college friend. Believe it or not, Megan said, trying to stay calm. Emily shot back, What's a college friend doing in James's room in the middle of the night? Are you ashamed, mistress? Chapter 3. Megan, wait a moment, I called from the door, struggling to hold myself up. My body swayed, and I leaned against the wall for support. Emily, I told you I was sick. If you wouldn't buy me medicine, I had to ask my friend. What madness was this? I must have looked weak, so Emily didn't doubt I was really sick. Her aggressive attitude immediately softened. Why didn't you explain earlier? If you had, I would have come back sooner. Megan rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, looking at Emily with a smirk. Lady, weren't you busy partying with your lover? Even if he told you, would you have believed him? Emily glared at her, anger flaring. Who are you calling a lover? I've already told you Daniel and I are here for work. Are you spreading rumors now? I could barely stand, and Megan quickly noticed. She applied a fever patch to my forehead, which helped me regain a bit of clarity. Rumors? Emily, be honest. Did I say anything untrue? I only mentioned you were out clubbing with another man and didn't want to get me medicine. Which part was a lie? Emily was at a loss for words, giving Megan a death glare. Why are you discussing our business with outsiders? Megan retorted. This outsider just saved my life, and you. Since you came back, have you shown any concern for my illness? All you do is argue. Emily fell silent, but Daniel, who had been listening, stepped in. Who says Emily doesn't care about you? We came back within half an hour after your call, didn't we? Megan glanced at the bags in their hands. I've been to that club. It closes at 2 a.m. If it hadn't, you would have stayed all night, right? Both Emily and Daniel fell silent. I looked at Megan, grateful. Thank you so much for today. It's late, and it's not safe for you to go back alone. I'll pay for a room here at the hotel for you, and you can leave tomorrow. Megan shook her head. No need. My brother is coming to pick me up. James, take care of yourself, and don't let some shameless people take advantage of you. She glanced pointedly at Emily, who immediately flared up. Who are you calling shameless? Megan shot back. Whoever gets angry is who I'm calling shameless. Just as it seemed they were about to argue again, with many neighbors opening their doors to watch, I shouted, Enough! Emily, aren't you embarrassed? With that, I slammed the door, cutting off all sound. I was sick for 3 days, during which Emily and Daniel went out every day for work, but I no longer cared. On the 4th day, once I was fully recovered, I decided to help Emily and Daniel finish their project survey as quickly as possible. The sooner we got back, the sooner I could deal with the issues in my marriage. I needed time to reconsider things. Who would have thought that when we reached the equipment truck, I would overhear Emily and Daniel talking? On a whim, I turned on my recorder, feeling like I might capture something important. "What should we do? This equipment is broken." That was Emily's voice. "This equipment costs over $1 million. None of us can afford to replace it." There was a moment of silence. Then Daniel spoke. "I remember James's family has money, right?" "Yes, his parents run a business." "What do you mean?" "Let's blame it on him. No one will know." Chapter 4. When they came out and saw me sitting in one of their temporary camping chairs, they were both startled. "James, when did you get here?" Emily asked, her discomfort evident on her face. Daniel remained calm. "Didn't you hear us talking earlier?" "No," I said, shaking my head. Sure enough, both Emily and Daniel breathed a sigh of relief. Then Daniel gave Emily a meaningful look right in front of me, but I saw it all. I watched them pretend, finding it almost amusing. Emily walked over and asked gently, "Are you feeling better?" I couldn't help but laugh inwardly at their foolishness. They couldn't even hide their actions properly, but I still nodded and said, "Much better." Emily then asked about my well-being for a while, but finally got to the point. "Honey, Daniel and I have been working all morning. How about you help us with one of the machines so we can take a break?" I readily agreed. "Sure, where's the machine?" Emily's eyes lit up, and she pointed toward a black van parked nearby. "It's in the back seat, the blue equipment." As I walked over, I caught a glimpse of Emily and Daniel exchanging a high five out of the corner of my eye. I pretended not to notice and opened the car door, looking around. "Honey, I can't find the equipment. Where is it?" "Isn't it right on that seat?" I pretended to search a bit more. "Still can't see it." "Where exactly is it?" Emily's tone grew impatient. "Isn't it right there? How can you not see it?" I quickly nodded, pretending to find it. "Oh, here it is, but honey, I can't move it alone. Could you ask Daniel to help me?" She blurted out, "Why are you so useless? Daniel can move it by himself." Realizing her slip, she quickly corrected herself. "Okay, I'll get him." I watched as Emily approached Daniel and said something to him. They both glanced at me meaningfully, and I knew they were scheming again. Daniel came over casually, belittling me. "I've heard you've been working out for years. What is it? Hormone injections? You can't even lift a small piece of equipment?" "I've been sick. My strength hasn't fully recovered," I said, not bothering to argue. I followed Daniel as he led me to lift the equipment. There was a glint of cunning in his eyes, clearly plotting something. I held the equipment steadily. I could easily carry 2 of these by myself since I usually lift weights 2 to 3 times heavier at the gym. But I couldn't let that slip. Sure enough, after a few steps, Daniel suddenly exclaimed, "James, hold this for a moment. I need to tie my shoelace." Without waiting for a response, he let go of the equipment. "Hurry up, Daniel. I can't hold this for long," I urged. The more I urged him, the slower he moved, telling me not to worry. I pretended to struggle, calling out several more times. Seeing I still hadn't dropped it, Daniel couldn't stall any longer and reluctantly stood up. "I need to tie my shoelace too," I said, letting go and crouching down. Daniel, still crouching, suddenly stood up, momentarily dizzy. Thinking he could handle it, he wasn't paying enough attention, and in that moment of distraction, the equipment slipped from his hands and crashed straight to the ground. Chapter 5. The casing shattered immediately, and the main body of the device cracked, rendering it completely unusable. This sudden turn of events shocked everyone. From a distance, Emily thought she had succeeded and hurried over. "James, this is $1 million device. Since you broke it, you should pay for it." I innocently pointed to Daniel. "It wasn't me. Daniel didn't hold it steady." Daniel, clearly stunned, instinctively retorted, "No, it was you. You let go first." I said, "I told you I needed to tie my shoelace, and you nodded." Emily hadn't expected things to go this way, so she tried to defend Daniel. "Couldn't you wait until Daniel had a better grip before letting go?" But I reminded her, Daniel did the same thing. He said he needed to tie his shoelace and suddenly let go without warning. If I hadn't held it steady, the one in trouble might have been me. Finally realizing the situation, Daniel glared at me with resentment. "James, you did it on purpose. You pretended you couldn't hold it just to frame me." I feigned surprise. "Why would I frame you? Are you suggesting that the machine was already broken and I somehow schemed to make you take the blame?" That would be unbelievably cruel of me. Emily and Daniel's faces alternated between green and white. They opened their mouths to argue, but found no reasonable comeback. I don't care. Even if the machine is broken, you still bear some responsibility. If there's compensation to be made, we should share it, I said quickly, pointing to the nanny car parked behind us. No way. The dash cam captured everything clearly. I let go with your consent. Although the audio isn't clear, your nodding is visible. Shall we check the footage? Daniel's face turned ashen. He squatted down, muttering to himself, $1 million. I can't afford that. Even if I sold myself, I couldn't pay for it. Emily's heart ached. James, even if we take a step back, don't you bear any responsibility? What responsibility? I replied. Even if I take 10,000 steps back, I have no responsibility. Seeing that she couldn't argue further, Emily glared at me and turned to comfort the squatting Daniel. All right, you two think about how to compensate. I have something to do and need to go. With that, I turned and drove straight to the city bank. After verifying my identity, I was ushered into the VIP room. I wasn't there to withdraw money for Daniel. On the contrary, I was there to make sure that didn't happen. Mr. Su, what business would you like to conduct today? I want to cancel a supplementary card under my name, I said. After we got married, I had given Emily a supplementary card. I transferred all my company dividends to that card, knowing Emily would surely use it to pay Daniel's compensation. I had to cut off this possibility in advance. Certainly. Your membership level is quite high, so we can process this immediately, the bank representative replied. I arrived in Beijing before Emily and Daniel had any idea of what had happened. After the 5-hour flight landed, I was immediately bombarded with calls, all from Emily. Chapter 6, I called her back slowly, and as soon as she answered, a frantic voice blared through the speaker. James, did you cancel my card? Yes. Is there a problem with that? I asked, sounding completely indifferent. Why would you cancel it? You said that card was for me to use. Besides, it's our marital property. Do you even have the right to do that? Her voice trembled with frustration. I couldn't help but chuckle at her anxiety. I have my reasons. Do I need to report to you about every little thing? Unlock the supplementary card right now. I need it. Emily's tone was demanding, as if she had some authority over me. Sorry, not happening, I responded casually, deliberately trying to push her buttons. Where are you right now? Emily's voice carried a touch of suspicion. I went to your room, but you weren't there. Are you hiding? I pretended to remember. Oh, I forgot to tell you I went back to Beijing. Why would you go back? Was it because you weren't happy with me being there? Her words seemed almost accusatory. I thought about it, and with Daniel in such a mess, I didn't want to add to his troubles, I explained coolly. Emily cursed at me on the other end, but I acted as though I didn't hear her, casually picking at my ear. Oh, and by the way, come back soon. Let's get a divorce, I casually added, dropping the bomb and hanging up. After returning, I immediately went to the first office, where I instructed the receptionist and security staff to ensure Emily wasn't allowed inside. If she caused any trouble, they were to call the police. Then I returned to our downtown apartment, changed the locks, packed my bags, and booked a month-long trip to Europe. I invited my parents along for the trip. As I headed off on my vacation, I arranged for a professional agent to handle my business affairs. I also got a new phone number for work and tucked my old number away, out of sight. Since marrying Emily, I had rarely felt so relaxed. She constantly pushed me to work harder, always belittling me and accusing me of not giving her the life she wanted. Fearful of her criticisms, I worked nonstop. As the boss, I arrived at the office earlier than everyone and left later than anyone. Over the last 3 years, my nerves had been stretched tight, always tense. Now, breathing in the fresh air of an unfamiliar European town, I felt my body and mind relax. Reflecting on it, I couldn't believe how I had survived the past few years. After spending a comfortable month traveling with my parents, I boarded the flight back home. My parents had sensed the tension in my marriage with Emily, which was why they had supported the trip, but no one dared ask about it, fearing it would upset me. I had once been so deeply in love with Emily that I couldn't imagine marrying anyone else. I never explained anything to my parents. They were older, and I didn't want to burden them with my troubles. I made the decision to handle everything myself. Upon returning, I reinserted the phone card that had been dormant for a month. As expected, the moment I did, a flood of calls and messages came through. In fact, Emily had been flooding my social media accounts, but I had blocked her everywhere, which gave me some peace. I didn't bother reading the hundreds of messages. Instead, I just called Emily. "When are we getting a divorce?" I asked flatly. On the other end, Emily was nearly shouting, "James, where have you been for the past month? Do you know Daniel took out a high-interest loan to pay the compensation, and now he's being chased by creditors? How could you be so heartless?" Chapter 7. Well, it's such good news, unfortunately. I was so out of touch while abroad that I didn't know any of it. I reached out to a mutual friend to get the full story. After I canceled Emily's supplementary card and left for my trip, Daniel had a meltdown. He yelled at Emily, "Didn't you say you'd pay for me? What now? I can't pay it back?" Emily, as always, tried to soothe him. "It's okay. I'll go to Beijing and ask James for the money in person." But when she arrived at my place, she discovered not only had I left the country, but I'd also changed the locks. Emily went to my company, but no matter how much of a scene she made, the receptionist didn't let her in. She then planned to go to my parents for sympathy, only to find I had taken them away as well. This completely broke her. She had about 300,000 yuan saved up and borrowed more from different people, but when she asked my friends for help, they refused and scolded her. She even tried borrowing from her colleagues and managed to scrape together only about 100,000 yuan, leaving her 600,000 yuan short. The lab that owned the damaged equipment kept pressing Daniel to pay, so he had no choice but to borrow 600,000 yuan from local loan sharks, agreeing to repay 700,000 yuan within a month. Who knows what gave him the confidence to think he could pay it back? Maybe he believed that with Emily's help, he could squeeze money out of me. A month passed, and the debt collectors caused a ruckus at Daniel's company, which led to him losing his job. He tried to find work elsewhere but was tracked down by the collectors, beaten, and ended up in the hospital. The loan sharks called everyone around Daniel non-stop, and now he was abandoned by everyone except Emily, who stayed by his side in the hospital. When my friend told me this story, I couldn't help but laugh. He advised that the most important thing now was to divorce Emily, but I had my doubts about how easy that would be. I reassured him, "Don't worry. I had evidence, and if Emily agreed to the divorce amicably, that would be fine. But if she caused trouble and took it to court, it wouldn't be as simple as a regular divorce." Sure enough, as soon as Emily found out I was back in the country, she rushed to find me. She looked haggard, clearly worn out from taking care of someone, and walked briskly toward me. As soon as she saw me, she demanded, "James, where have you been this past month? Do you know how hard things have been for us here?" "I know. So what does that have to do with me?" I responded flatly. "I'm still your wife. Is there a problem with me wanting to use our joint marital property?" Emily's voice was sharp, full of anger. I watched her rage, then replied coldly, "Didn't you receive my divorce agreement? You leave with nothing." "Why?" Emily snapped. "I didn't cheat." I sneered, and then played an audio recording from my phone. "It's not just about cheating," I said. "I have reason to believe you married me with ulterior motives." Emily had been angrily cursing me, but when she heard the voices from the phone, she fell silent. "What do we do? This equipment is broken." That was Emily's voice. "This equipment costs over $1 million. If we break it, neither of us can afford to pay for it." The conversation filled the room. Emily muttered, disbelief clear in her voice. You knew everything." Chapter 8. "So what if I knew?" I asked, my voice calm. Emily's eyes suddenly flashed with malice as she glared at me. "So, you deliberately called Daniel over to help you move the equipment just to frame him?" I frowned at her wording. "Wrong. Daniel tried to frame me but ended up harming himself. Emily, I'm the victim here. I only avoided your trap. Everything you and Daniel are facing now is what you deserve." I leaned in slightly, adding, "And let me tell you, if you don't agree to the divorce, I'll submit this recording to the police. You and Daniel might end up in prison." Emily finally showed some fear, lowering her once proud head. "James, you're something else. Doesn't 3 years of marriage make you feel any pity for me?" "It's not worth it," I replied coldly, watching as Emily signed the divorce agreement. I immediately sent it to my lawyer and scheduled the formalities for a month later. There's now a 1-month cooling-off period for divorces, but I wouldn't regret it. That incident had made me see Emily's true nature, and I realized my 3 years of feelings weren't worth it. That's why I could walk away so firmly. Otherwise, I'd still be trapped in her manipulations, unable to break free. A few days later, I attended a class reunion. My classmates knew about my divorce, but none of them tried to persuade me otherwise. Only Megan patted me on the shoulder and said, "I wanted to advise you to get a divorce, but thinking about how you chased Emily like crazy back in college, I was afraid you'd regret it once you recovered, so I didn't say anything." I laughed. Back in college, I was poor at judging people. I just threw myself at anyone I fancied, I replied awkwardly. Megan raised her hand to stop me. Not the least bit embarrassed. "Who's asking you to agree now? There's plenty of time in the future." She gave me a bright smile, and I smiled back. Indeed, there's plenty of time in the future. Chapter 9. A month later, the day Emily and I had scheduled to finalize the divorce arrived. Emily seemed to have dressed carefully for the occasion, though I couldn't tell if it was to celebrate the divorce or to try to make me regret it. But no matter how beautiful she looked, I couldn't care less. "Let's go get the formalities done," Emily said, but I could sense a bit of hesitation in her voice. "Wait, James, you know once we go in there's no turning back," she warned. I nodded indifferently. What's there to regret? Seeing my attitude, Emily bit her lip and stepped closer. "But I regret it. Don't you want to give our marriage another chance?" I quickly pushed her away, disgusted by the mere touch. "Emily, we both know the truth. Even if we go back, there will always be a rift between us. Whether you cheated or not, you've crossed my bottom line. We are never going back." Chapter 10. After I finished speaking, Emily seemed to finally give up. Her face turned cold. "James, you're really something." What I didn't see was her signaling to someone behind a nearby car. Emily and I entered the Civil Affairs Bureau together, and as I reflected on the last time I was here, I was filled with excitement and anticipation for married life. But now looking back, that life only existed in my memories. I had married Emily, and it could never happen. The procedures were completed faster than I expected, and I breathed a sigh of relief as I held the divorce certificate. It was all over. Perhaps seeing my relaxation, Emily's face turned extremely ugly. "Divorcing me makes you so happy?" she asked, venom dripping from her words. I laughed twice. "Sorry. You noticed? Since you noticed, I won't pretend anymore." After leaving the Civil Affairs Bureau, I walked toward my car, ready to open the door, but Emily suddenly approached me. "Even though we're divorced, it was a peaceful divorce. Why not give me a ride?" I didn't even look at her. "Sorry, it's inconvenient. I have to pick someone up later." Megan had just arrived in Beijing for a business trip, and we had planned to have dinner together. I was busy replying to her message when Emily glanced at my phone and, in an angry tone, asked, "Chatting with a woman? I can't believe you found someone else right after our divorce." Emily tried to guilt-trip me again, but I wasn't buying it. I sneered and retorted, "Better than you, finding someone before the divorce." I was chatting with Megan, not noticing when Emily disappeared. Suddenly, Daniel's voice came from behind me. "James, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in this situation. It's all your fault. Let's go to hell together." I didn't have time to react. When I looked up, I saw Daniel charging at me with a gleaming knife. I dodged the fatal spot, but the knife still stabbed into my chest. All the strength in my body seemed to drain away, leaving me feeling empty. Blood poured from the wound as I watched in horror. The road was mostly deserted at that hour, and Daniel, realizing what he had done, turned and ran. A Civil Affairs Bureau staff member came out and saw me lying in a pool of blood. They screamed and quickly called an ambulance. As I was lifted into the ambulance, barely conscious, I grabbed the doctor's hand and shouted, "The culprit is Daniel, and Emily is an accomplice." I don't know if the doctor heard me before I passed out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My chest hurt terribly, and even the slightest movement felt like my body was tearing apart. I could barely move, but I managed to shift my eyes and saw Megan asleep beside me, holding my hand. I gently moved my fingers, and Megan immediately woke up, her face lighting up with surprise. "You're awake! I'll call the doctor." Megan brought the doctor, who briefly explained my condition. Daniel had aimed for my heart, but luckily I managed to dodge a little, so the stab wound wasn't fatal. However, I had lost a lot of blood and was very weak. With the wound freshly treated, I had to stay in bed and couldn't move for a while. But what I wanted to know wasn't just that. I wanted to know whether Daniel and Emily had been caught. Chapter 11. After the ambulance arrived, the Civil Affairs Bureau employee called the police and followed me to the hospital. Since I was unconscious, the doctor relayed my pre-ambulance statement to the police. With surveillance footage from the scene, Emily and Daniel were quickly identified. Emily was arrested that day, but Daniel was nowhere to be found. The police found evidence on Emily's phone, proving her involvement in the conspiracy to harm me. Now, the police were conducting a citywide search for Daniel. I nodded to show my understanding. I never expected Daniel would actually dare to stab me in public. It seemed he was willing to risk everything. Looking back, I felt relieved that I had dodged the fatal spot. Otherwise, if Daniel had succeeded, it would have been a terrible loss. Emily's parents came to the hospital with fruit to plead with me. Even though I had been their son-in-law for 3 years, I still remembered how they had tried to exploit me for money. Emily's mother sat by my bed and glanced at Megan, who was peeling an apple. "Could the nurse step out? We need to talk." "Auntie, you can speak freely. This is my girlfriend," Megan said, her eyes lighting up as she looked at me. I nodded at her, while Emily's mother looked displeased. "You found a girlfriend right after divorcing Emily?" she asked. "Were you seeing her before the divorce?" "Stop," I interrupted. "I don't need to explain my fidelity to you, but Emily conspiring to murder me isn't exactly irrelevant." Emily's mother looked embarrassed, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm here to persuade you. After all, you and Emily were married for 3 years. Can't you let this go, over a minor issue?" "A minor issue?" I frowned. "I was stabbed and almost died. How would you feel if someone did this to Emily?" Emily's mother stubbornly said, "But you didn't die, did you?" Looking at her face, which resembled Emily's, I felt nothing but disgust. "Rest assured, if I had died, your daughter wouldn't be alive either. Attempted murder carries the death penalty. Maybe Emily was misled by that Daniel, but you know she's not like that." Hearing the same old excuses, I grew impatient. Megan seemed to have had enough, standing up and driving them out. "The patient needs rest. If you have nothing else to say, please leave, or I'll call security." "You little girl." Before they could say more, Megan pushed them all out, leaving the room quiet. She sat back down and asked, "Were you serious just now?" I pretended not to understand. "About what?" "About me being your girlfriend?" she asked, clearly teasing. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. I don't say things lightly. Whatever I say reflects what I'm truly thinking. Chapter 12. A week later, Daniel was caught on a boat trying to smuggle himself out of the country. He had planned to escape abroad, but was caught during a crackdown on smuggling. In court, both Daniel and Emily pointed fingers at each other, each claiming the other was the mastermind and that they were the victim. Ultimately, the evidence showed that the idea to harm me originated with Daniel, and with solid proof, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment for attempted murder. Emily, as an accomplice, was sentenced to 10 years. Emily's parents spent all their money and pulled every string they could to reduce her sentence, but it was to no avail. They all received the punishment they deserved. After everything settled, I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The weight of the past few months had been unbearable, but now it was over. Emily and Daniel's actions had shattered my trust, and though I had once believed in our future, I had now come to realize that moving forward without them was the only way for me to heal. Megan remained by my side through it all, offering quiet support without asking for anything in return. We spent the following weeks talking about everything and nothing at all, taking comfort in each other's presence. I had learned not to take things for granted, to cherish what truly mattered. As for Emily, I didn't know what her future would hold, but I knew mine would be different. With her gone, I was free to rebuild my life, and with Megan's friendship, I finally felt like I had a chance to find peace.